The Battle of Appomattox Courthouse was one of the last battles of the Civil War. Happening on April 9th, 1865, General Lee's Army of Northern Virginia entered the town of Appomattox Courthouse. His army had led a fast retreat away from the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia, after a 9.5-month siege of Richmond's key supplier city, Petersburg, by the Union. Lee fled Richmond to move west to try to meet up with the Confederate Army of Tennessee. When Lee arrived at Appomattox Courthouse, he realized that west was a line of Union cavalry. He made the decision to go through the lines of Philip Sheridan. At dawn, Confederate General John B. Gordon led an attack on Sheridan's cavalry and easily broke through the line of Charles H. Smith. After a while of fighting, was able to break through the second line of cavalry, and Gordon's troops stormed through the ridge. But once they came through a crest, they noticed Federal troops on their right and ahead of them, with the XXIV troops in front of them and the V Corps on the right. These troops were of the Army of the Potomac, Shenandoah, and James, led by Federal General Ulysses S. Grant. The roughly 28,000 to 29,000 Confederate troops engaged the 63,285 Union troops awaiting them. Lee and his forces made a desperate escape to Lynchburg, with 195 Confederate troops dying in the battle and 164 Union troops being killed or wounded. In Lynchburg, Lee made the call for a suspension of fighting to see the terms of surrender proposed by Grant. The Confederate General Longstreet handed a white dish towel as a flag of truce to the Union General Custer. Custer said, "In the name of General Sheridan, I demand the unconditional surrender of your army." And Longstreet replied that he was not in command of this army, but if he were, he would not deal with messages from Sheridan. Custer replied, "General Lee has gone to meet General Grant, and it's for them to decide the future of these armies." Custer was right about the meeting, and at 8 a.m. on April 9th, 1865, General Robert E. Lee rode to Grant. When Lee asked Grant in a letter where the place of surrender should be, Grant replied that Lee could choose the place of surrender as an attempt at reconciliation. Lee accepted and chose to meet at a house in Appomattox Courthouse. The first house selected was unsuitable to negotiation. Instead, they chose the house of Wilmer McLean, a man who tried to escape the Civil War years before when his home was near the Battle of Bull Run. Grant, at the negotiation table, now filled with emotion, changed the subject to years before, the only time he and Lee had ever met, during the Mexican-American War. Lee changed the subject back to surrender, and Grant allowed Lee's men to be paroled and allowed them to go home with their horses and belongings other than weapons, and gave the starving army rations to survive the way back. Lee accepted the surrender on April 12, 1865. Lee's army fully disarmed and walked home in defeat. Grant's men began to cheer, but Grant ordered them to stop, explaining that this was the time to reunite with their former countrymen. The outcome of this battle changed the Civil War, since it was the symbolic end of the war. With the War in Virginia effectively over, and the Confederacy had lost their best general, Robert E. Lee, and soon after, the Union would capture the entire Confederacy. Unfortunately, however, only 6 days after the battle, a dough-faced actor named John Wilkes Booth snuck into President Abraham Lincoln's booth in Ford's Theater during a showing of Our American Cousin, and shot him days after Abraham Lincoln had celebrated the symbolic end of the American Civil War, the Battle of Appomattox Courthouse. After the Civil War, there stayed a division between North and South as Northern Republicans decided what to do with the South. General Robert E. Lee was pardoned for his treason and got to live in the new Union. President Jefferson Davis of the Confederacy was tracked down and only served 2 years in jail for treason. John Wilkes Booth was tracked and found in a barn in Northern Virginia and died in a shooting match with Federal troops. General Ulysses S. Grant went on to become President of the United States of America from 1869 to 1877, where he tried to carry out Reconstruction of the South, which would unfortunately be ended by President Hayes, which resulted in years of white supremacy and segregation in the South, something that set the United States years back from progress. And General Custer died in 1876 at the Battle of Greasy Grass, also known as Little Bighorn, fighting Sitting Bull and the Plains Indians on their ancestral homeland. The Battle of Appomattox Courthouse changed American history forever and still is seen as the end of the Civil War, even though it lasts a few more weeks.